Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Our guest is a paranormal researcher, investigator, author, and poet. She has multiple awards for her work and has been seen in many paranormal TV shows. Please welcome Amelia Cotter to Epic Realms. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm very glad you're here. You're our first guest of the year, and I'm super excited. We don't do a ton of paranormal guests, and I'm super glad to have you on. I was telling you a little bit beforehand that I was on a trip to Baraboo earlier this year, and the people of the city of Baraboo were very memorable for you about you. They brought you up every time I mentioned I did a podcast. They're like, "Oh well, have you had Amelia Cotter on? Oh well, she wrote this book about Baraboo," and going on and
That's
on about it. And I
awesome.
was like, "That is super cool." I know the name Amelia Cotter. She's been on Darkness Radio. I've had both Tim Dennis and Dave Schrader on here. Dave Schrader is now doing Paranormal 60, and you've been on that show as well. So I was like, I was well aware of who you were, and I was like, this is a great idea. I should have Amelia on, and here you are.
Here
So
I am. Yay.
in the realm of the paranormal, everybody always asks, and I know they always ask you this. We actually brought this up right before we started. What's the scariest thing you've ever done? What's the scariest thing that's ever happened? And I'm not going to ask you that, but in kind of the spirit of that, out of all the evidence you've seen and all of the things you've experienced, what's kind of the standout thing to you that makes you go, okay, there's something to this. This is real. Do you have a piece of evidence or experience that's like stands out in your mind of like, okay, this tells me that this isn't just a hallucination or my own mind or, tricks?
Sure. I've had a number of different weird experiences, things that were uncanny and strange. Um, but I do have one sort of gold standard, like cardinal experience that happened to me when I was a kid. Um, where I did see an apparition. And this was the one and only time that I ever saw an apparition in my life. I've seen other things throughout, but I was 11 years old. And I was exploring an abandoned house that was close to where my dad worked. This was back in Moncton, Maryland, near the Manor Tavern restaurant for people who might want to Google it. Um, and there was an abandoned restaurant literally across the parking lot where people who were patrons sitting on the patio having their fine dining could go look out at this cool abandoned haunted house that was known locally as Walter's house. I fell in love with the house as a little tiny nerd. And I was exploring the house one day with my friend and my mom because my parents were hip to this kind of stuff. And wished in my heart that I would see the ghosts. We called all the ghosts, all of the ghosts on the property were collectively just referred to as Walter. And so I wish that I could see Walter, even though this person that I saw may or may not have been named Walter at all. As we were leaving the property, we were in our car driving away. The road was very close to the house. The property was only 7 or 8 feet from the road. And I looked up into the windows of the attic. Those attic windows, I think, are featured on the book cover of this house, The True Story of a Girl and a Ghost. But I looked up into the windows sort of wistfully, as we're driving away. And there was a young man standing, or a boy or young man, teenager, standing at the window with his hands on the windowsill, leaning out, looking at us. And he was completely white. He had no face, so no defining facial features, not like a scary vacuum, but like just almost like a doll, like a doll's face. But I could see the texture of his hair and his clothing, and he had like suspenders, and his sleeves were sort of gathered at the cuff, like he was wearing like late 1700s, kind of early 1800s stable boy clothing, which would check out with um, the type of housing and the type of property that this was. It was the third Lord Baltimore, uh, like sprawling property. So anyway, his head turned slightly as we were driving away. And also at the same time, I got a tingling sensation in my stomach that felt like a swirling sort of static energy.
Yeah.
So I could feel that he was looking at me, and I could feel that his expression was curiosity and surprise. I could feel that he was surprised that we could actually see him. And I thought, so we were sort of driving really slowly because we were looking at the house as we were driving away. Obviously, my mom was driving, and both Graham and I saw him, and we gasped. And then my mom like hit the brakes, and she was like, "Do you want me to back up?" And I, in my 11-year-old wisdom, I was like, "No. If you back up and he's still there, I think the experience will turn from like awe to fear. And if you back up and he's not there, I don't ever want to tell myself that I didn't see what I just saw, because it was a solid
Yeah,
human form, just completely white. And I knew in my heart that that was the spirit of this house, and that I had been lucky enough to see him. So I've had a lot of interesting things happen since then. Some of them have been very profound. That was like a life altering experience that sort of set me on this journey that I am this weird journey that I'm on today. So
that's awesome. It's interesting how many people don't realize that a feeling or like the a sensation of something paranormal, whether it's a communication or dream traveling or ghost interactions, how those sensations really are different from, oh, I just ate something bad, or butterflies in the stomach. It's a different feeling, and unless you've had it, you can't really point that out.
right. That's a good point, because we're very evidence focused now with videos that are getting crazier and crazier with wanting to have some sort of visual evidence. But often some of the most like profound personal experiences are the ones that just include these really intense feelings. And I'm a person that can work myself into a frenzy in an abandoned house at night because it's really spooky and oh my gosh, right? And like that is a different type of energy and feeling than when you really get like when you get struck with that sort of like what you're talking about, like that just that very special and specific sensation when of knowing that something is there. And in some cases I would argue, or some people would argue, that that's not even paranormal, that's just our natural human response to beings around us, that we don't have to use those senses anymore. So it's like tapping into something that's deeper within us.
For sure. When you're researching and writing for a book, do you have a goal in mind ahead of your time researching and putting it together, or do you gather the information and go, okay, this is how I'm going to present this? um, how do you go about that? What is kind of your process for telling these stories?
So I've been around for a long time, and I've only written 5 books. It takes me forever to to really commit and bring a book idea together. I know people that write 1 or 2 or 5 books a year. I don't have that like in me. I spend a long time thinking about the book and what do I want the message of the book to be, and how do I want to bring my voice to it, and how do I want to bring stories into it. So I'm not um, somebody who's so let me say it differently. So my appreciation in my research is for stories and people's personal experiences. So I always want to make sure that I'm bringing a lot of personal depth to my writing and my stories. If you read a book like Maryland Ghosts, my voice is in that a lot. I'm interviewing a lot of different people about their personal paranormal experiences throughout the state of Maryland, but that's my home state. So I'm also bringing a lot of my emotion and nostalgia into it. Um, I really try to take my time with it, including, with the Baraboo book, which I wrote during the pandemic. So I was never able to, I've been to Baraboo plenty of times, but during the physical writing of the book, I was never able to get to Baraboo. And I did a lot of, Library of Congress research from home, from my kitchen table and stuff like that. But I had wanted to be really sensitive about like sort of extra sensitive about bringing in like the Baraboo and the old Barabooan personality into the book. It took me a long time. It took me a year to write it, and then sit on it, and then just kind of vibe with it before it was like ready to go.
How do you pick which stories out of all the people you talk to? Do you just throw them all in there, or do you have to go through and be like, this one doesn't really fit, this one does, when you're picking up other people's stories and kind of putting them into your stuff? How do
I'll
you
throw
filter?
I'll throw everything in there. I'll find a way to fit everything in, like every little detail. So like in Maryland Ghost, there's a section at the end where if somebody told me just like a snippet of a story that was really cool, but not enough to flesh something out. I just had a whole section of like snippets, like pieces of conversations that you might hear. Um, with the Baraboo story, I was writing it sort of in cooperation with the old Barabooins. So like Shelley Wells requested specific stories be put in. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of stories that come from like ghost hunters. Like sometimes I would get a story from somebody that was like, and then we got this hit on the K2, and then 3 hours later we got this EVP, and it's like I think that's really cool for the people who are experiencing it, but it doesn't always translate well to a person who wants to just read like a really good ghost story, because a lot of ghost hunting as a paranormal investigation as a hobby in the last 10 years or so, and I think the paradigm is shifting, but it has lacked a lot of that sort of like emotion. It's been very like science,
Yeah.
right, with quotation fingers. And so that doesn't always make for the best stories on the page. So I would go back to that person and be like, just tell me more about how you felt while this was happening. What were the sensations in your body, or like what else was going on? Like help me build the story more, and just kind of coach some more details out of them. Or find that really creepy element in the story. And now on the other hand, people would be reluctant to send me stories because they weren't creepy enough. And I said, no, don't do that. If you heard footsteps, don't assume that I want to receive a story where something wild and crazy happened. If your whole story is that you were in this neat historic place and you heard footsteps, that's a story. So I'll really try to work with anybody and try to value and validate anybody's experiences as well.
Yeah, because you can't say no to anybody's experience because there's so many weird things out there. As wild as it sounds, that's still their experience. You can't really take
Right.
that away from them. Who are we
No,
to like say, oh, that didn't really happen, or you're making it up, or is it really this? If that's their experience, that's their experience. Period. End of subject.
exactly. So I would never, right, I would never like poo-poo anybody's specific experience. I only try to get the best from them to translate it into a fleshed out story so that other people can experience it with them as well.
You have a little bit of historical ties into some of your work as well, where you kind of tell the stories a little historically as well. Can you tell us about that and how you approach that?
So, um, in Maryland Ghosts, it was really important for me to give some background information. I wish that you know it- more books would follow this format sometimes, where like give a little bit of background on the history of a place or a person or a thing, talk about the folklore, and then talk about people's personal experiences. Too often, those three things get jumbled together in one. It's really important to kind of separate those out. Historical context is really important. Things we know for sure happened, things we speculate could have happened or might have happened, what the rumors are, what the folklore says, and then people's personal experiences. Sometimes they all interweave together, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't seem to interweave, which is also kind of cool unto itself. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of haunted places now where people have died. People used to die in the home all the time, right? So oh, somebody died in this house is fairly common in history. But when you go there, the people who report sightings and experiences in some of these places will say, oh, there's this crawler. It's this thing that people see that's like a shape that just crawls along the wall. And it's like, well, what does that have to do with Bobby dying of cholera, right? So it's
Right.
kind of interesting. There have been so many ghost hunters that have come through, or there's been so many different types of energies in the home, or who knows what else may have happened in the house. We linger on the big things, but who knows what type of everyday relationships people had and the energy they left behind. So there's a lot of different things to explore, and things don't always like it makes sense, and they don't always have to make sense, right? And um, but but anyway, it's just it's always it's fascinating to I'm a history buff, and I'm also into folklore. And so I like to make sure that all of those things are equally represented. One thing I was really proud of about the Baraboo book is that this was the first time that anybody had really synthesized the history of the old Baraboo Inn, because that building has a lot of snippets of history. And I think it was Joseph Ward who did a tremendous amount of work in just the Baraboo and Sauk County. Um, uh, Gathering a lot of information about the really cool history there. But it was in different sort of bits and pieces, and so I was able to kind of synthesize like some sense of history, like a cohesive history and timeline for the old Baraboo Inn, which was really fun for me to do. I live in Chicago, where most of the great research has already happened. There's all these wonderful researchers here, Ursula Bielski, Adam Seltzer, all these awesome people that are boots on the ground. And so it was nice for me to have that type of opportunity as well.
That's awesome. Out of all of the like little stories and books and histories, is there one in your books that you really enjoy? And if so, would you share it with us?
I'm going to be weird.
Okay, that's all
And
right. Welcome to Epic
so,
Ones.
right, I came to the right place today. Um, I'm really proud because there's sort of like the Easter egg that is in my children's book, Breakfast with Bigfoot, is that it's actually based on a real historic Bigfoot encounter.
Okay,
So I don't remember all of the details at this moment. I have told this story many times, but the story is based on the Albert Ostman encounter of 1924 in British Columbia, I believe, where he went into the wilderness, and claimed, and this was years later, so he didn't come out of the woods and be like, everybody, this insane thing just happened to me just now. You're never going to believe it.
right,
He waited almost until like he was on his deathbed. Like he waited decades to tell this story because he knew it was so unbelievable. And he wasn't, this was way many years before Bigfoot became and Sasquatch became popular in the 60s and 70s, like in the popular imagination and everything. And so he really didn't know what to do with this experience, but he had been lost in the woods and was abducted by what he claimed was a family of big feet. So he found himself, in this nest, this sort of like nest surrounded by what looked like a mom and pop and baby and like grandpa, grandma Bigfoot. And he was able to sort of detail this really well. Like he remembered very vividly this experience, and he understood that they weren't trying to hurt him, but he still knew that he needed to like get the hell out of there. Um, and so he kind of like they fed him and they like looked after him, and he wasn't sure exactly what their plans were for him, but he took the opportunity to escape when he had it. So I've always loved that story. And there's another great podcast episode of Astonishing Legends where they really cover that story in depth. Um, but so I based my heartwarming children's book for ages 3 through 6 on just on this story very generally, and then turned it into like a little girl who meets Bigfoot in the woods. She's lost, and then they become friends, and he rescues her, and she finds her dad, and it's teaches kids how to be responsible if you lose your parent while you're out hiking. Um, so anyway, I sort of get a little kick out of that. Just it's fun to tell people about that. Like Breakfast with Bigfoot is not my most popular book. It was the one that was probably had the highest budget with the publisher that it was published with, and it took the longest to get like onto the bookshelves, which was so funny. It's very like people at the paranormal conventions and people who are into the children's books aren't really sure how they feel about it, but I do, so I enjoy telling people that story. I'm like, get it for yourself. If you're a Bigfoot fan, you know, check this book out. But yeah, it's like my little secret that I have with myself and my books.
well, and it's that book is fun, and the art is just super cute
Thank
and
you.
adorable. I see it, I was like, oh, I want a big
The
Bigfoot friend.
the original illustrator of that book was a really great artist, and she's groovy, but like she really wanted to do these avant-garde like collage, like photo collage illustrations of and in hindsight, I think it actually could have gone really well. My publisher and I were both really shocked. Like I was a little scandalized because it was like pictures of like a little girl sitting on this bed nest next to this man, but who had like a Bigfoot head. And I was like, I think this we're sending the wrong message to the kids, right? This is
Right.
weird.
Yeah.
They were cool, but I was like, this is so surreal. And so they ended up paying this illustrator off to kind of like cut her off. And I think she probably got paid more to be cut off from the project than I've ever been paid for any writing project I've ever done. And then they brought in this guy, Charles Swinford, who's great illustrator, comic artist, and everything. And, you know, what's your vision? Like cute, fuzzy guy that looks like the Marvin the Martian, right? Like, or not Marvin the Martian, the who's the big fuzzy guy from Looney Tunes? You know what
Yeah,
I'm talking
yeah,
about?
yeah. It's like, wasn't it like the abominable snowman, and I can love him and hug him and
Something
call him
like the
George?
abominable. Well, there was that too. So I was digging it because it touched on those things that I remember from my childhood, and I was like, yes, this is the happy, fluffy Bigfoot that we wanted. That's not going to give the kids nightmares. I don't mind having nightmares, but I don't want to give the kids nightmares.
Right. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about your poetry, because that has been such a big part of you and who you are. Tell us a little bit about how that got started, your book, and your continued love for poetry.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I've just always been somebody who couldn't pin myself down into any um you know my dream when I was a kid was to be a writer. I wanted to be all kinds of writers. I wanted to be Edgar Allan Poe, I wanted to be Sylvia Plath, I wanted to be Toni Morrison, I wanted to be all these people. And so I wanted to do stuff that was fun and meaningful, and I sort of accidentally got involved in the paranormal, but 100% wanted to write ghost stories. um but I do love poetry, and it's just been a very important part of my body of work as a writer. I understand that, like, for some people, it's kind of like, wow, that doesn't really make sense. That's not really on brand. But for me, I'm like, I just want to, I'm only going to be here for a short time, right? I want to do everything. And poetry also helped me sort of cash in my serious writer card, which meant more to me a few years ago than it does now that I'm well established and everything.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, I was very aware. I had like a hyper awareness 10 or so years ago that people would call me a ghost hunter, and I was a little embarrassed by that. For better and worse. It's a silly thing now, but at the time I it got to me. Um, and so anyway, my journey with poetry is that I have I wrote a book called Apparitions, which took me 5 years to publish. The book is 40 pages of haiku. So again, speaking to the idea of like, I really like to take my time with things and think them through. But it sort of encapsulates the last 5 years of some struggles that I had gone through. It has a vaguely paranormal theme to it, but it's really about trauma, survival. And one cool thing about that is that some people pick it up and they're like, "Oh, what's this book about?" I'm like, "It's a book of poetry." And they're like, "Oh, what's this other one about?" But then some people pick it up and they're like, "Oh, poetry, what kind of poetry?" And I'm like, "Well, it's kind of serious. It's about trauma and survive, et cetera." And they're like, "Ooh." And then they're like, "Oh, this is really close to my heart." And, um, so it's been a really wonderful way for me to also connect with people. And, you know, I I have a few other I'm working on like another poetry book now as well. Sort of I have some feelers out about that. I'm just kind of keeping all of my options open, and I just kind of pivot. Like one year, I have a theme, kind of like a running theme for a few months or a year, where I like to focus on one thing and then pivot and then come back to it and pick something back up. And I am a finisher. Like I do finish projects and I always follow through. And I generally don't start something that I can't finish. Um, but I do enjoy kind of digging into a mood and going with it and then coming back. And so doing this year is going to be probably some more ghosty kind of stuff. Getting back into the poetry last year was all last year started with poetry and then went full on into the paranormal through the end of the year. So
there's something
If that makes
relieving.
sense in my brain, that makes sense, but sorry.
No, no, that's fine. There's something relieving and like about writing shorter things like poetry, short stories, you know, and things like that that you can really get stuff that's on your back off your back. You can express yourself. It's very much like drawing art or painting or any of that kind of stuff. It's still an art where you're expressing yourself, and you can. It's like therapy for a lot of people. Do you find that true about your writings?
Absolutely. So that's a really good point. So the paranormal stuff satisfies the side of me that wants to um, keep going in my career and moving forward and doing more research and geeking out on stuff and telling ghost stories. It's one part of me that I love. The poetry really satisfies that part of me that wants to be creative, that wants to share my feelings, that wants to connect with people on that level. And so yeah, and like short form, like short form poetry and short stories are like a special kind of like art form that I enjoy exploring, and I do find them very very meditative. And it's fun to sort of be part of these different communities as well and just sort of get different perspectives on life and writing from these various communities.
You mentioned that you have a little variance. You go to your poetry, you go to the paranormal, you have your children's book. Have you thought about branching out into other variations of the paranormal? I know you've talked about other topics on other shows such as cryptids and stuff like that. Have you thought about doing books on cryptids or UFOs or shadow people or
Mhm.
any of the other many various paranormal topics that are out there?
I talk about that stuff a lot, so, they come up a lot in my presentations. I have a whole monsters presentation that I do. Last year was a great year in the news for cryptids and UFOs. My god, it was raining from the sky. It was amazing. I had so much to talk about, and I have thought about that, if that would be something cool to write a book about. Again, a lot of the topics that I would like to write about have already been written about. People stole my ideas, right? No, but so I am in the process of wanting to think of like my next idea for like a paranormal book type of venture, and cryptids are actually on my mind. So I was thinking about nobody hold me to this, but I'm really fascinated by stories about like we talk a lot about in the world of cryptids about like how Sasquatch and Bigfoot are seen throughout the United States, but in sort of different variations. Like
Yeah.
Sasquatch of the West is tall and muscular and man-like and huge and spooky. And then by the time you get to the East Coast and down in Florida with like the skunk ape, and then our little adorable little Bigfoot that we had in Maryland that had like three toes, which is a whole other story for another day. But three-toed big, but they become much more ape-like and smaller and more like chimp-like or orangutan-like. And I've found that the same sort of concept is true about like sightings of large winged creatures. So on the East Coast, we've got like the Jersey Devil and the Snallygaster and all this cool stuff. And then when you move towards the Midwest, we got the Piasaw bird in southern Illinois, which looks very similar, is described in a similar manner at times to the Jersey Devil, but also sort of sounds like the Thunderbird as you go further
Yeah.
west. And so I'm sort of interested. I'm sure there's probably already a book about that as well, but that's kind of something that I'm thinking about, I'm cooking up. But I always want to fold in, because so much great research has already been done, my special sauce, like the gift that I bring to the world is the storytelling aspect and sort of sharing people's personal experiences. So maybe it would be cool to do a collection of cryptid encounters or something like that.
Yeah, you could do a whole bunch of them. You could do all variations of the ones you mentioned, and the other things. You just like this is a Mothman and its variations book. This is a Bigfoot and its variations book. This is the
Right?
whatever dinosaurs. People see dinosaurs all the time, whether it's pterodactyls down south or the Loch Ness or whatever. You
Right.
do a whole
So
variation of that in those encounters.
I have to, so yeah, it's like it's fun and it's scary at the same time for me when I set out onto like a new project. I work full time as well as just all the other things that I'm involved in life. So one of the reasons I'm so selective about projects is like I will become obsessed with this and it will be all I will think about. Um, and so I'm going to add that list to my little jar of ideas and then see what I can kind of cook up. And then in 5 years, my book of cryptid encounters will come out.
Well, I'll be in line for it. I'll be in line for it.
Right.
Then you
Excellent.
have to go on a tour and sign all of them and all that
Yes,
kind of stuff.
that would be awesome. Actually, that sounds amazing. So
And get a guest
I'm there.
spot on Expedition Bigfoot or
Yes. Oh my gosh. Me in the woods with making little like yipping sounds. That's my next big adventure.
have you done outside of obviously like ghost hunting and that kind of investigation? Have you done like any Bigfoot hunting or cryptid hunting or UFO hunting type stuff?
I have not. I have heard sounds coming out of the woods around Baraboo before that were very similar to the type of sounds that you hear when people claim they capture like recordings of a Bigfoot.
Hmm.
To me, that's like the closest thing that I had to a Bigfoot encounter. And of course, I already know what everybody's thinking. Like, Amelia, animals make all sorts of strange sounds, like raccoons and foxes, and even birds will make these crazy screaming noises and everything else. And I'm fairly well familiar with all of that. This sound that I heard coming from the edge of the woods, where I was looking towards the edge of the woods and I didn't see anything, um, was really like got me in the it had that sort of chest feel where you can tell that you're in the presence of something that is
Yeah.
amazing. And it sounded like those Bigfoot recordings. So it very well could have been a bobcat that was really pissed off at me. That would still be cool. In all honesty, I would take it because I've never seen, a bobcat before. But anyway, I told that story to some people and they were like, oh yeah, there's been a lot of sightings in the woods around Baraboo and Devil's Lake of these like Sasquatch like creatures. So I'm like, all right, I'm checking it off the list then. So,
It's
but
interesting how
that's
often all of the things in the paranormal kind of cross over, isn't it?
it is. And so funny how people did not used to talk about it at all. Like Bigfoot people used to be a whole different, like ghost people, alien people, and they were all too weird for each other. Like I'm a serious ghost hunter. I base things on science, which is rarely what ghost hunting is based on. And now there's so much this really cool, rich conversations around how like all of these things are really very much connected and like so many of these weird things happen in conjunction with each other and there's so many more questions than answers.
Yeah. If I had a list or a dollar for every single time somebody was like, "Yeah, I was at this place and we were UFO sighting, and there was these sounds in the woods, and it was just down the road from a haunted house." All
Yep.
it's like the heck, or like places like Skinwalker Ranch where they get all of
Yes,
it,
right.
all of it.
Right, absolutely everything. Yeah, to me that's cool. It's exciting because it's not like I'll ever get bored with ghosts, but I have in recent times gotten more into like UFO and abduction stories and storytelling and sort of like understanding more about that than what is even available, like what's available in mainstream paranormal culture is not even what is just scratching the surface of what's available if you really dig deeper into the subject, and it opens up just this whole rich world, and like my mind is so much more open now than it used to be.
Yeah, that's crazy. Going back to some of the ghosts and paranormal stuff, do you feel, and we touched on it just a little slightly earlier, do you feel that there are different types of entities out there, or do you think that they're all just like kind of one thing? Because everybody has a different mindset. Everybody, there is no official ruling of like this is a poltergeist and this is this, and this is a
Right.
residual. Do you think that they are all kind of should be in separate categories and should try and be categorized, or is it all just like it's a spirit, it's a thing?
Right. I feel like, I mean, categories help, right? Because they help us like organize thoughts and information into buckets, right? Like certain types of phenomena follow this sort of set of rules that we call like poltergeist activity. I think we run into trouble with labels and names when it becomes like too intertwined with like religious concepts
Hmm.
because there's such an Anglo-Saxon like Christian bent on the world of um on our understanding of the paranormal, here in the US right now in this moment with the way that ghost shows are angled towards demons and demonic possession and all of this stuff. It's like becoming, even the Catholic Church is like backing away.
Right.
And so some of the terminology can really get people, I think, people who are prone to getting mixed up can get really mixed up in some of that, and it can become um, very scary very quickly. But it, I also do think that there's a variety of types of beings and activity that are out there, just as there is a variety of beings and activity here on our planet that we do know about in this dimension or realm. And so we shouldn't like pigeonhole everything. I think it's like, let's categorize it this way, but understand that this is beyond our understanding. Like
Right.
we really won't know until we get there. And that's kind of the fun part for me. I like it that we don't know or can't know, and things get weirder and weirder, and there's aliens at the Miami airport one day, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm there for it. But but yeah, I think it's beyond the scope of what we can understand, which is why so many of us, and myself included, have dedicated all this time to exploring it. But I've definitely also found it's true that this is somewhat related, but I've found it's true that when I spend too much time thinking about it or focusing on it, or if I spend too much time ghost hunting, like when I filmed shows before and I was constantly in haunted places, or when I was doing the Chicago Hauntings ghost tours and I was constantly talking about it and going to these places several nights a week, that I felt like sort of like a residue on me. It affected my mental health. It
Yeah.
affected me emotionally and sort of bogged me down in a way that it is as another reason why I sort of strategically come back to it and then step away. But no matter what it is, it does have that kind of effect on you of like the abyss, like looking back at you kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
100%. I've seen that happen to almost everybody at some point. Some people get deep down in it, and then some people learn how to um, manage and mitigate that.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, based on that, do you have anything you do to prep going in? Do you, some people will say prayers or mantras, or, some psychics will have certain processes they go through before going in. Do you, certain jewelry, do you do anything specific before going in to kind of prep yourself or to protect yourself?
Yeah, I definitely want to be cautious, better safe than sorry, right? So I have my little mantras. Just I'll say like a little prayers, a little sort of like just kind of getting into a mindset too. And I think that's fair to personal protection is really important, but also like just the act of paranormal investigation is such a weird thing when you're going into somebody's house or an old prison or a hospital or something. And it's just like it's best to like put yourself into a mind frame of like respect and boundaries, right?
Right.
And so I do that. Sometimes I'll take like a piece of lucky, whatever, like my lucky little, like if, I'll still take like a stuffed animal to fly when I fly on an airplane, just like some sort of like lucky thing that makes me happy, brings me joy and safety. And then at the end of the night, and usually, so if I do anything where I'm like talking to dead people kind of stuff, I'll always be like, you're welcome to come and talk with me or sit with me, but you cannot come home with me. Do
Right.
not follow me home. I do not want to wake up at the hotel and at 3 a.m. and you're there over the bed. I'll be vocal about that in the moment and then at the end before I leave. And usually just that sort of power of belief is enough to kind of cool off anything, any kind of energy.
I hear that so much, that the power of intention, putting your mind towards whatever it is. And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're religious and then it's you're saying prayers, you're still putting that
Right.
intent forward. If you're wearing something that's, I've got my own like little protective jewelry things that I'm that I've got
Right.
that I'm showing you, but the people on the show can't see. You wear these, items, whether it's a Star of David or a cross or jewelry or whatever that you do, that's putting out the intent of, protection. So it feels like a lot of it is us saying no, it's just saying no.
I want to be open enough to welcome activity, but unwell, but not so open that that I'm susceptible. But you know, this is painting with broad strokes, but generally speaking, you'll find the experience that you're looking for, right? You'll find the people. If you believe that people are a certain way, if you believe that all um men are jerks or all women are shallow or something, you'll find your way to those types of relationships in your life. And I think the same is true for different kinds of experiences. The people that I've seen really freak out and or be followed home or have issues in investigations are the ones that um, don't necessarily set those boundaries, but are also they're looking for like a wild and crazy experience. Like
Yeah,
the quote, I think the saying is that the first step to possession is obsession. So people that like love, people that are attention seeking, that seek love maybe in toxic places, seek attention in toxic places, want to be the center of attention for various reasons, which I do not judge. Um, can be more susceptible in those situations, especially when it comes to like paranormal things, to having like an attachment or having like an emotional experience that ends in tears or something along those lines. Very generally speaking.
yeah, I agree. You've been a part of a ton of shows. You've been on your fair share, we'll say.
Thank you.
Could you explain to our audience how and why certain stuff gets edited the way it does, or gets put in, or taken out, or maybe changed a little bit? Because a lot of times you see a show and you're like, well, why didn't they show that? Or you'll hear somebody like, well, this other thing happened, but they didn't show it on the show. It was really cool, but they didn't put it in the show,
But they
even though it
didn't
was
put
the
it
coolest
in.
thing. Could you explain some of the processes behind that?
Yeah. So I sort of had some of the same thoughts. So when I did the R.I.P. files, um, I was really fascinated to learn that some of those things, like some of those audio things, have to do with like national and international like laws about like sound and audio in television. So like, why is this music like really loud and obnoxious? Has to do with like the literal volume that they have to like play certain things at. So obviously I'm not an expert on this,
Right.
but I was very like, I was like, because my question, so we didn't have access to the episodes until they were finished. So we are the talent, right? We go there and we go home. We're not producers, so we don't have our hands in the project otherwise. So we just gotta like, if something really cool happened to me, I would just have to kind of keep my fingers crossed that it would make it into the episode. And sometimes sometimes moments were sacrificed for the flow of the show, or they needed to, the person who's sitting behind the editing desk is the one who's like, no, no, this seems cooler. We're going to go with this. This has a narrative. Like all of those shows still build a narrative, which is probably part of the problem, right? Is that like we want to tie all these ghost stories up neatly with a bow. Everything has this lovely conclusion. Everything that happens leads us to a point where we understand or we have closure. And often in real life, that doesn't happen
Yeah.
with paranormal experiences and hauntings. So, things will be done to fit the narrative that they want. And so, not a narrative in a weird conspiratorial way, like they're lying to the audience or
Yeah.
anything, just like, oh, we want to make sure that we show this part of the investigation where so and so is in the basement because it fits in with how we talked about the history of the basement earlier, more neatly than this weird thing that happened in this random closet or whatever. Another thing was that the audio that we would capture with our EVPs would sometimes we would capture the most amazing EVPs, and by the time they got filtered through to the very end to the final cut, It would sound like just a bunch of garbled like nonsense. Like if you watch Ghost Adventures and like sometimes you can hear, sometimes it's nice and crisp. You're like, oh yeah, I can hear that. And other times it's like, and then it's like, but then they give you a whole sentence and you're like, wait, play that again. It's probably the person who was hearing it in their headphones heard it great. But by the time the reel got to somebody's office in, somewhere in Hollywood, um, that it was lost in translation. So
Yeah.
some of those things too. Um, my experience was that people were always on the up and up, and the talent and producers. So we had like a shoestring budget. So we had to film everything in one night. A lot of the ghost shows will, everybody will put on the same shirt and they'll film like 3 nights in a row so that they can try to get cooler evidence.
Yeah.
We had to film everything overnight in one night and just fingers crossed that enough cool stuff happened to fill like 42 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, but generally everything was on the up and up. One time, maybe I was watching the show and I heard a sound in the background that was attributed to the paranormal, where I thought, looking back, I think that was actually, I think the cameraman like accidentally backed into something, and knocked something over. Um, so that definitely can happen and does happen, but it's like not not like anything nefarious of like, let's trick the audience into believing this place is more haunted than it is. I know a couple shows have gotten into trouble for that, but a lot of that stuff really does happen on the back end because the people who are front facing, the investigators, the ones who are like the talent on the show, and the ones who are out there, hustling, signing autographs and stuff. If you're not Zach Bagans, you're not making a lot of money, right? So you're out there hustling. You have no reason to kind of lie or lead your audience on or anything. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah. You've been on the R.I.P. Files, Hometown Horrors, Scary Stories, Tinker's Shadow.
Yeah.
Doing all of these, how did you get into all of these shows? Like, did they just call you up one day and say, "Hey, we need somebody"? Did you just know people and they're like, "Hey, we're putting something together. Do you want to be a part of it?"
Been really blessed. Like, so yeah, so the producer of the R.I.P. files was somebody that I used to have a talent agent like 2013, and we were in the same like Facebook group together with this talent agency. So that's how I met her. And then I was able to send in my audition for the show. Um, Ursula Bielski hooked me up with the Scary Stories documentary. The Scary Stories documentary was filmed here in the Chicagoland area and at that awesome cathedral in Gary, Indiana, which is right around the corner from the demon house that has now been torn down. So in the process of filming that, I was able to go visit the demon house. Oh boy, day trip, but which is great. Oh, yeah, it's just a weird thing to be like, it was so cool. But so, so much of this too is just based on connections, people that everything that I am is, sure, I have, talent, I'm a good writer and everything, but like a lot of who I am is built on just like forming good professional relationships with people and keeping those, relationships healthy and intact. Opportunities that come through, like when I was working with the folks from Baraboo, this was before the Old Baraboo Inn book. I was invited to speak at the Old Baraboo Inn just out of the clear blue sky, and ended up getting along really well with Shelley Wells, who was the sister of the late owner, BC Farr, and just really connecting with them. And then when the Travel Channel came a knocking to do an episode on Baraboo, and Shelley was like, make sure that you talk to Amelia because she has had some really cool experiences here, and she's an author and historian. And so there I was. And then Michael Colleen, who was my former publisher at Black Oak Media, all of those books got absorbed by Haunted Road Media, who's the publisher of that is Mike Rixicker, who's getting really big right now in the world of like ancient aliens and stuff. Go Mike. But anyway, so and then Michael Clean, he filmed the documentary about Tinker Swiss and then invited me to host it, which was so fun.
That's
And I'll
awesome.
be at Tinker Swiss Cottage on April 26th.
Woohoo! You've also done some consulting on other shows, right?
Yeah, so that's another thing too, where just by virtue of existing as myself, anybody out there who's you know, um, writing paranormal books has probably gotten that cold email at some point or other about people that are like, hello, I'm so and so looking for people's paranormal experiences. Can you connect me and blah blah. And I ended up having a really good relationship with a producer, Heather Finley, who had worked on a lot of like Paranormal Witness and all these cool shows, and just forming relationships with her and other people so that I was doing some consulting and background work with a few different things. So Paranormal 911 and Fright Club and haunted hospitals. And that was neat, you know, interviewing people and helping with research and setting up locations and stuff like that.
That's really awesome. That is super cool. Are
Thank
you
you.
planning on doing more of that kind of stuff, or is it like if it shows up, maybe we'll see?
Oh man, I would love to. I'm always dying to be back on TV. I'm shameless. I have nothing to hide. I love being on TV. I don't want to be a star of a show as a paranormal investigator unless people are looking for specifically someone like me. But I'm not really super comfortable. The R.I.P. files was awesome, but that wasn't really my jam, like the paranormal investigation part. I really like to be that talking head. Like, let's bring in Amelia Cotter, you know, to talk about the history or tell a story or introduce something. I love stuff like that. I'm always eager for those opportunities. Um, and you know, so we'll see what happens. I love TV stuff. Last year I was I tell everybody this like until I die, but I was an extra on The Bear. Um, so I've been working with like a casting company just to do background work, just for my own personal like joy and enrichment, not like I'm gonna be the next big thing, right? Discovered in the back, this 40-year-old woman who was discovered in the background of season 2 of The Bear. But I just really did it for fun, and I had a great time, and I ended up making it into like 2 episodes, and there's little clips of me, and I'm like, there I am on TV. So I am very much like, you know, I'm an attention hound for that kind of stuff. There's no doubt about it.
Well, that's fun too because you have something you can show people and get excited about it. And I completely
Life is
understand.
right. Life is short. Everybody should do something that gets them excited and that they like to talk about. You know, if somebody, I love geeking out on stuff, and I love it when people want to geek out with me on stuff. It doesn't have to even be something that I like or know anything about. I think I just love to see people enjoying their life.
Nice. All right. We didn't ask your scariest moment at all, but what is do you have a moment that was like you feel might have been a little more heartwarming or more positive that kind of stands out to you? A story about something that's like, oh wow, that's pretty neat. Whether
So I
it's yours or
appreciate
somebody else's story.
That's cool because again, like, yeah, before we came on, I was joking about how people always ask me what the scariest thing is that ever happened to me. And you were like, I'll cross that one off the list. But
No,
no,
no, it wasn't on the list. It was specifically me saying I'm not going to ask
like you're not,
this.
okay, good. Like, yeah, like I'm not gonna ask that, which is yeah. And every time people ask me that, I draw a huge blank. Like I'm like, oh, I don't even remember what the scariest thing was. And then I'll remember something really cool at like 2 a.m. And I'm like, I should have told that story instead of the same, you know, whatever. I've had a lot of interesting things happen. I have had some heartwarming things happen, and I'm glad that you asked. And I'm blanking on that now too. But just let me go through the Rolodex in my head real quick.
Can hear it clicking, click, 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 click,
Right?
click.
Like when SpongeBob is in his brain with the filing cabinets. There was uh, an incident at I think it was the Apollo Theater in West Virginia. What's the town? Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Uh, Upstairs where there was supposed to be the ghost of a man who had I think he had died by suicide, and he had been a drug addict, and he had had many issues, legal issues and otherwise, and his spirit was supposed to have haunted this upper floor, second or third floor up there in this theater building. You know what? Let me look up real quick because I don't know if it was the theater or if it was a different thing. But as so I'll keep talking. But the story, you know, was that it was very violent, and the Shenandoah Hotel. So excuse me, we had done an episode at the Apollo Theater, which was also really cool, but this was at the Shenandoah Hotel.
Okay.
It's still in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. So the story was that he had, his ghost was very violent and scary. And, two of us, actually all three of us ladies who were upstairs had direct family members, connections, past life histories with people who have struggled with addiction, and suicide. So we did not approach this with the idea that this was going to be some spooky ghost that was going to come out and get us because we're vulnerable women. We really went into it like, thinking about this guy and empathizing with him and wanting him to come out and talk to us. And I remember, um, all three of us cried. So we had this feeling. It was just like this sensation filled the room. It was like gas. It was like somebody turned on a fog machine, right? It wasn't. We didn't see anything, but it was just like the room filled with this very intense feeling, that led us all to tears. And I remember feeling that there was somebody like standing behind me, very close to me. It wasn't a comfortable feeling. It wasn't like a good feeling. It was still an icky feeling, but that it was like I was being approached by this man and that he was, breathing on me. And I was just, it didn't feel great about it, as I wouldn't if that happened to me in real life, but I was still able to like empathize with him and like, we're just here to listen to you and hear your story. Um, and it was very emotional. We cried. All three of us cried and talked about a little bit about this. Was one of the things that got cut because I think it was just too real. We all talked about our experiences with our family members and stuff, and it was a shame that that part got cut because also, um, the audio technician, who was this really cool lady that was kind of standing in the corner. She had this thing that looked like a popcorn, like the guy at the ballpark that like gives you popcorn and hot dogs, except
Mhm.
it was filled with like little microphones and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
and all of the equipment. And she was like standing there with that, like with her headphones on, and she like looked at me and she said that, when I had remarked that I could feel breathing on me, that my mic that was attached like somewhere on my shirt right there picked up like heavy male breathing. And so everything else that happened in that room was just this feeling we all had, right? This emotional overwhelm. And you could think, oh, well, all of us were overwhelmed emotionally. So of course it makes sense that we all sort of riffed off of that. And that was like our one piece of something that it was like, no, this wasn't our imaginations. It wasn't my imagination. I actually felt this sensation and we were able to somehow connect with him.
That's really cool. I love hearing those kinds of stories, and I love that it's not always negative. That's one of the things I loved about the things that Dave Schrader had done with like the Holzer files is it's more realistic. It's not like you ghost, you blah blah blah, and inciting or whatever.
Like
It's
you're
finding the story, finding the humanity in these
right.
people that lived, and seeing, empathizing with them and understanding them and getting to know them personally. It's very special, and that means a lot to me as a person, as a viewer, as a fan of all things paranormal. I just love hearing stories like that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
You have some upcoming projects you can talk about at all? Any upcoming projects, things you're working on that you can
So
talk about?
yeah, right. I have some cool, like articles and things that are going to be coming out this spring in various publications. I can't really like mention specifically what they are,
Okay.
but if you follow me on social, which I encourage everybody out there to do, I love to connect with people. Those will be coming out in the next few months. I'll be making those announcements. Just some neat research projects I've worked on over the last year. I have some book ideas that are cooking. I have a poetry book that's like out being shopped around that I'm very like, that's really cool on the back burner kind of thing. Like I'm not really hot with that right now. But that could always turn into something on a dime, right? And then I just have some appearances. I'm trying to do less this year than I did last year because last year was my year of yes, where I said yes to literally everything. So the only year in my life that I will ever do that because it was exhausting, but it was awesome. It was epic. But so this year I'm trying to be more discerning and just do like, I mean, I already suck and have said yes to everything, but I'm telling myself I'm not going to keep saying yes to everything, but I have some really neat stuff coming up. So, um, a couple more like podcasts and then some in-person appearances, and then those will continue to build out throughout the year, like obviously culminating in Halloween madness. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And then people can check me out. My website is ameliacotter.com uh, to stay up to date with all of my publications and appearances and everything. But do you want me to just,
Yeah, let
is
us
this a
know
good time to
what you're doing.
just
You got the
rattle
and
off?
explain to
Okay,
me
all
what
right,
the boutique showcases as well, because
for
I'm really
sure.
curious about that.
Absolutely. So Amelia's Dragon Goddess Boutique is my super teeny tiny side hustle that I have with my husband. It's just a part of my my husband makes homemade incense and solid perfume, and we have some postcards that are his photography, his fine art photography, as well as these little meditation kits that include dragons, like little dragon figurines and candles and oils that we have made homemade. This is something that he wanted to do as a hobby, and we just kind of turned it into like a micro business, truly, that we, in addition to my books, we take these things to my events and we sell them there. But we do sell online as well, and we've had them placed in some stores. So I'll be doing a little YouTube, or actually it'll be on YouTube, but it'll be like a Facebook Live probably, um, or a YouTube Live of just like our 3-year thank you. Just us doing a little showcase of what we have. We only have like 4 or 5 products at a time because it's, we're not a storefront. It's just
Right.
us in our little apartment. um, and so just like we'll have a coupon, we'll thank everybody. And I encourage people to take a look at that. I have a store that you can access from my website. And it's called Amelia's Dragon Goddess Boutique was the fun name that we came up with for that. On March, that'll be on February 21st. On March 12th, I'll be on Spaced Out Radio at 11 p.m. Central Time. God help me, I will need a lot of caffeine for that. But I'm excited about that. And then I'll be on the Folklore podcast as well at some point. So that is a pre-taped interview that I did some time ago that I'm excited to come out. And then I'll be at the Tinker Swiss Cottage on April 26th. You will need to, I think, order a ticket for that. And I'll be doing a talk about the R.I.P. files and the real and paranormal reality television. So they just had Jack Osborne there for one of his programs. He's got like a bazillion programs out
Yeah,
now. And so they're sort of going to ride on the heels of that, having me come do a little talk about like paranormal reality television. And some of that will be just like seeing clips of the R.I.P. files and talking about cool stuff that happened. And then also having like a philosophical conversation about like the value of paranormal reality TV, kind of like some of the things that we've talked about. And then this is like very early, but I'll be at the Chicago Paranormal Convention in Countryside, Illinois on June 8th. And then while we were talking, somebody from the podcast Sasquatchers reached out to ask for an interview as well. And of course, I'm going to say yes to that. So I'll be looking forward to being on that podcast soon also.
that's awesome. That's great. I love that, and I love supporting all these other podcasts. So guys, go check out all of these podcasts that were just mentioned. Go and check them out. I know not every podcast does that, but I do because I believe very firmly rising tides raise all ships, and so go check out all those amazing podcasts and shows as well. They can find you at ameliacotter.com. You're on Facebook /author Amelia Cotter, Instagram at Amelia Cotter, and YouTube at Amelia Cotter.
Actually, just one correction.
Okay.
Thank you. Amelia M. Cotter. So the M between Amelia and Cotter has haunted me my entire career because somebody got to Amelia, some other person who has the right to be named Amelia Cotter got to all these handles before I did. So I have all of my handles are Amelia M.
Oh my
Cotter,
gosh, how
and
did I miss the M? I see, like,
man,
I'm looking at the email. It's like, it's right
no,
there. It's right there.
it's fine because I mean, like people have like PayPal'd Amelia Cotter, and like luckily, whoever she is, she's never accepted any money or like said F you or anything, or whoever she is out there, she's always been very polite. But yeah, so Amelia M. Cotter, but thank
Amelia
you.
M. Cotter. Thank you for correcting me.
I'm sorry,
Now I
it
feel so
sneaks
embarrassed that I missed
right
that.
in there. And I am desperate for YouTube subscribers. I am not going to, be two ways about it. Like I only have 28 subscribers on my YouTube channel, and it, keeps me awake at night. So I'd love to see more subscribers there. And I'm working on like a content concept so that I can start putting more stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
I know everybody's always working on something with that, but I really, I do post I do like storytelling sessions online a few times a year, and then I put them on YouTube. So
Yeah, you and I were talking a
yay,
little bit about that before
I
the
know.
show as
Whew,
well.
that's so big. Yeah, it's so big.
All right, folks. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by renowned tabletop game designer Corey Kaneska. He's made games such as Twilight Imperium, Star Wars Rebellion, Star Wars Imperial Assault, Battlestar Galactica, Eldritch Horrors, and dozens of others. So that's going to be live January 26th. The podcast will be available on the 27th. Also, from the Heroes Feast cooking show, Chef Mike Harris is going to be joining us. If you like that cookbook, like the story, like D&D, any of that kind of stuff, you're going to want to tune in for that. We're going to be joined by author Chris Schmitz and many more. So follow, subscribe, rate, review so you can keep up with us. Also, leave us a 5-star rate and review. It does help us and helps our guests. So, for Amelia Cotter, I am Nick, and I want to thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.